A wonderful day to one and all. I'm Leonard Corpus Sinad, the group leader of Chapter 4, which is entitled Deontology. So before we proceed, let me first introduce you my group member. Of course, me, Leonard Corpus Sinad, Simon Gabriel, Raycalin Terqueza, Jericho Viernes, Jen Villanueva, Carla Siwagan, Micaela Wee, Juliana Soriano, Marlu Sanner, Jubilin Wee, Ashby Tomolva, Edmar Ventura, and lastly, Marvic San Antonio. There are 3 objectives of deontology. So after reading this chapter, you should be able to first, discuss the basic principle of deontology. Second, apply the concept of agency and autonomy to one's moral experience. And lastly, the number 3, to evaluate action using the universal disability test. So, deontology has 3 main subtopics. So first, the duty and agency. Second, the autonomy. And lastly, the universal disability.
Introduction. Deontology. Kant's deontological philosophy stemmed from his belief that humans possess the ability to reason and understand universal moral laws that they can apply in all situations. Unlike many other ethical theories, deontology does not focus on the consequences of individual actions. Personal emotions behind actions also do not matter within Kantian deontology because Kant believed humans do not always have rational control over their feelings. Instead, the intent behind chosen actions holds far more importance. Therefore, deontology proponents judge actions based on what most people consider to be morally correct, regardless of actual consequences. Deontology. Its name comes from the Greek word deon, meaning duty. Actions that align with these rules are ethical, while actions that don't are not. This ethical theory is most closely associated with German philosopher Immanuel Kant. His work on personhood is an example of deontology in practice. Kant believed the ability to use reason was what defined a person. From an ethical perspective, personhood creates a range of rights and obligations because every person has inherent dignity, something that is fundamental to and is held in equal measure by each and every person. This dignity creates an ethical line in the sand that prevents us from acting in certain ways either toward other people or toward ourselves because we have dignity as well. Most importantly, Kant argues that we may never treat a person merely as a means to an end, never just as a resource or instrument. Kant's ethics isn't the only example of deontology. Any system involving a clear set of rules is a form of deontology, which is why some people call it a rule-based ethic. The 10 Commandments is an example, as is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Most deontologists say there are 2 different kinds of ethical duties, perfect duties and imperfect duties. A perfect duty is inflexible. Do not kill innocent people is an example of a perfect duty. You can't obey it a little bit. Either you kill innocent people or you don't. There's no middle ground. Imperfect duties do allow for some middle ground. Learn about the world around you is an imperfect duty because we can all spend different amounts of time on education and each be fulfilling our obligation. How much we commit to imperfect duties is up to us. Our reason for doing the right thing, which Kant called a maxim, is also important. We should do our duty for no other reason than because it's the right thing to do. Obeying the rules for self-interest, because it will lead to better consequences or even because it makes us happy is not, for deontologists, an ethical reason for acting. We should be motivated by our respect for the moral law itself. Deontologists require us to follow universal rules we give to ourselves. These rules must be in accordance with reason. In particular, they must be logically consistent and not give rise to contradictions. It's worth mentioning that deontology is often seen as being strongly opposed to consequentialism. This is because in emphasizing the intention to act in accordance with our duties, deontology believes the consequences of our actions have no ethical relevance at all, a similar sentiment to that captured in the phrase, "Let justice be done, though the heavens may fall." The appeal of deontology lies in its consistency. By applying ethical duties to all people in all situations, the theory is readily applied to most practical situations. By focusing on a person's intentions, it also places ethics entirely within our control. We can't always control or predict the outcomes of our actions, but we are in complete control of our intentions.
So, what is deontology? Deontology is the category of normative ethical theories that encompasses any theory which is primarily concerned with adherence to certain rules or duties. So deontology is an ethical theory that states it is possible to determine the rightness or wrongness of actions by examining action themselves without focusing on their consequences. It doesn't focus on the consequences of an action. So this is the duty, rule, or obligation based. So what is duty? Duty is base ethics teaches that some acts are right or wrong because of the sorts of things they are, and people have a duty to act accordingly, regardless of the good or bad consequences that may be produced. Some kinds of action are wrong or right in themselves, regardless of the consequences. So, duty, when our motive is determined by a principle recognized by reason rather than the desire for any expected consequence or emotional feelings which may cause to act the way we do. The will is defined as that which provides the motives rather for our actions. So, agency. What is agency? It is the ability to make ethical decisions based on what is right or wrong. This capacity can be found in individuals or collective entities like businesses or healthcare institutions. So Agency is assigned only to those who can be held responsible for their actions. So agency is a person who has the ability to discern right from wrong and to be held accountable for his or her own actions. Agency have a moral responsibility not to cause unjustified harm. Agency is assigned only to those who can be held responsible for their action. Children and adults with certain mental disabilities may have little or no capacity to be moral agency.
The moral theory that evaluates the actions that are done because of duty is called deontology. Deontology comes from the Greek word being necessary. So, what is deontology? Deontology is an ethical theory that uses rules to distinguish right from wrong. One of the examples of deontology is the Ten Commandments. As it is the universal declaration of human rights. Most deontologists say there are two different kinds of ethical duties: perfect duties and imperfect duties. So what is perfect and imperfect duties? Perfect duties Kant calls them necessary duties that we should be able to will for all. He stresses that we should treat person as a persons, not use them for our own purposes. Imperfect duty, it is a more flexible duty. No rational person could will it. Hence, deontology refers to the study of duty and obligation. The main proponent of deontology is Immanuel Kant. He was a German Enlightenment philosopher who wrote one of the most important works on moral philosophy, Groundworks Towards a Metaphysics of Morals, 1785. In this work, Kant brings our attention to the fact that we human beings have the faculty called rational will, which is the capacity to act according to principles that we determine ourselves.
Sentience. Sentience meaning an organism has the ability to perceive and navigate its external environment insofar as dogs and carabaos are sentient organisms. We do not see them bumping into trees and walls unless their senses are weak. Animals constantly interact with their surroundings. This is also true to us humans. We are also sentient. Thus, both animals and persons interact rather in with the world. This is also true to us humans. We are also sentient. Thus, both animals and persons interact in and with the world, reacting to external stimuli and internal impulse to survive and thrive.
Duty and agency. Rationality consists of the mental faculty to construct ideas and thoughts that are beyond our immediate surroundings. This is the capacity for mental abstraction, which arises from the operations of the faculty of reason. Thus, we have the ability to stop and think about what we are doing, and to intervene in the world to act in a manner that is consistent with our reason. Example, in the social sciences, acting with instrumental rationality is doing what will get you whatever ends you wish to achieve, whether they are in your best interest or not. When we say that someone acts rationality in these senses, we usually also mean that she is subjectively guided by the standards of prudence. That is, we mean that she is motivated to do what she believes in her own best interests, or will get her whatever ends she wishes to achieve, and she is motivated by the fact that she believes it. We do not only have the capacity to imagine and construct mental image, but we also have the ability to act on the enact. Our thoughts is the basis for the rational will. It refers to the faculty to intervene in that world, to act in a manner that is consistent with our reason. As far as we know, animals only act according to impulses, based on their natural instincts. Thus, animals only act according to impulses based on their natural instincts. Thus, animals act with immediacy, from Latin it medius or no middle, with nothing that intervenes between the impulse and the action. They do not and cannot deliberate on their actions. In fact, we may say that animals do not act, they only react to their external surroundings and internal impulses. In contrast, we humans have reason, which intervenes between impulse and act. We have the ability to stop and think about what we are doing, to evaluate our actions. According to principles, simply stated, we are not only reacting to our surroundings and internal impulse, but are also conceiving of ways to act according to certain rational principle.
Before we continue our discussion, so let me introduce myself first. I am Ricaline Vader Quesa. So in philosophical discussion about human freedom, this capacity is called agency. So what is agency? It is the ability of a person to act based on her intentions or mental states, or kakayahang gumawa ng mga ethical decisions based sa kung ano ang tama o mali. So, for example, you may feel lethargic, mabigat ang iyong ulo, or your eyes are droopy. So, the corresponding impulse is to close your eyes and then fall asleep. However, yung rational will mo will demand something else. perhaps you have to finish reading this chapter for a quiz tomorrow. The quiz are really important. Yung quiz na iyon yung magiging formation mo as a student to earn degree or do productive work. So ngayon, ang tanging ginawa mo, you stand up briefly to stretch your legs. You may have already taken some coffee. Habang pinipilit mong manatiling gising at pag-aralan ang dapat, so ayun, yung rational will mo ay nagtagumpay over your bodily impulse as long as you stay awake. So ayun na yung ability mo to make a decision based sa kung ano ang tama. At intention mo iyon dahil gusto mo. Gusto mong makapasa sa pagsusulit kinabukasan. Let us go back to Reggie. So the moment he discovered that Trent had left his suitcase in the taxi cab, Reggie reacted according to his rational will to return the suitcase. He determined that it was his duty to return it in as much as his rational will had conceived such a duty. So, rational will, which is entirely devoted to or guided by impartiality and universality of reason. So, ayun nga, sa rational will, an action must be done because of reason. The reason you do an action should be because you have determined that it is the right thing to do. Like the example, si Reggie, natuklasan niyang may nakaiwan ng suitcase sa kanyang taxi, so he react based on her rational will na ibalik iyon sa may-ari. Tungkulin niyang ibalik iyon, iyon yung dapat. So, individuals don't always make rational decision. In reality, we are often moved by external factors that aren't rational. If you only react to your internal impulses or external surrounding mo, then hindi mo ginamit yung rational will mo. Gaya sana sa unang example, kunwari kung yung taong nasa example ay natulog kasi nararamdaman niyang lethargic na siya, though alam naman niya na kailangan niyang magbasa for the quiz, pero pinili niyang matulog. It only means that the act of this person due to her or his emotion, and their emotion is in control, not the rationality. Hence, to act according to a duty is especially human experience. Animals, if it's true that they do not possess the faculty of rational will, cannot conceive of having duties. This is the starting point of deontology. We may claim that as long as we have rationality, there will always be the tension between our base impulse and our rational will. So thank you. May I call on Miss Carla to discuss her part. Good day, sir. Good day, everyone. I am Karajin Asiwagan, and I'm going to discuss my part, which is the introduction of autonomy. So what is autonomy? Kant claims that the property of the rational will is autonomy, which is the opposite of heteronomy. These three Greek words are instructive with autos, heteros, and nomos, and with that we can get the autonomy. Heteros and nomos for heteronomy. Crudely stated, autonomy means self-law or self-legislating, and heteronomy means other law. Autonomy is the state or condition of self-governance or leading one's life according to reasons, values, or desires that are authentically one's own. So, para maintindihan natin kung ano ang ibig sabihin ng autonomy, mayroon tayong dalawang example dito. So consider the trivial example of brushing one's teeth, which is not yet a moral dilemma but is sufficient to explain the difference between autonomy and heteronomy. When you were a child, did you like to brush your teeth? As far as we can tell, children do not like to brush their teeth, but parents know that children should maintain oral hygiene. So parents try to find ways to get their small children to brush their teeth before going to bed using a variety of incentives or threats of undesirable consequences. So this is the example number 1. Hey Ryan, a mother tells her boy, go and brush your teeth now or else your teeth will rot. Second example, come on now Lisa, a father tells his daughter, if you brush your teeth in 5 minutes, I will let you play your computer game tonight. In the case of Ryan and Lisa, are they autonomous? Certainly not, as their parents are the ones that legislate the principle that children should brush their teeth before they go to bed and impose such a principle by using threats or incentives. Gaya nga ng sinasabi na ang parents daw ang mga autonomous. So bakit nga ba natin nasasabi na ang parents ang autonomous sa example na ito? So nakikita naman natin na may power sila to command, may power sila na utusan ang kanilang mga anak. They have the authority to command their children. At sa pamamagitan ng pag-command na yun, gumagana sila ng incentives or kaya threats para matakot yung anak nila at para masunod nila yung pinag-uutos nila. Now think about Ryan and Lisa years later when they are in their mid-20s. Suppose they brush their teeth every night before they go to bed and they do so without the prodding of their parents. At a certain point, perhaps when they were growing up as teenagers, they both reflected on the whole business of brushing one's teeth. Both concluded that they, number 1, they agree with the principle behind it, which having oral hygiene, and thus, number 2, every night they impose to it upon themselves to brush their teeth before going to bed. And so number 1, yung sinasabi sa number 1 na they agree with the principle behind it or yung pagkakaroon ng oral hygiene, nagre-refer ito na it refers to the act of legislating principle. And the number 2, which is every night they impose it upon themselves to brush their teeth before going to bed, or parang nakatatak na sa kanila yung gawain na iyon bago sila matulog or bago sila sumampa sa kanilang mga kama. It refers to the enacting of the principle. Thus, it also refers to the willing of adopted principle into reality. So now, are Lisa and Ryan autonomous? Sa pagkakataon na ito, yes, they are already autonomous. The description of autonomy is unusual. When we think of someone being subject to the law, we usually think of an imposing authority figure that uses his power to control the subject into complying with his will. For example, imagine a policeman who apprehends a suspected criminal by forcing him on the ground and putting handcuffs on his wrist. Incidentally, subject comes from the Latin words sub or under and jocere or to throw. When combined, the two words refer to that which is thrown or brought under something. The will must comply with the law, which is the authority figure.
First slide. The will must give the law itself. Sabi dito, therefore, the will is the authority figure giving the law itself. Thus, Kant describes autonomy as the will that is subject to a principle or law. Second slide. This apparent contradiction is entirely possible to exist, but only for self-reflexive human beings that have rational will. Remember Ryan and Liza and the principle of brushing their teeth. On one hand, heteronomy is the simple legislation and imposition of a law by an external authority. Or, a person must brush her teeth before going to bed. Their parents are the authority figures, and the law is imposed externally by rewards or punishments. On the other hand, autonomy belongs to the grown-up and already rational. Or Ryan and Liza, who adopted such a law about brushing their teeth. They regularly impose such a law on themselves out of the enactment of the will to follow the law. Third slide. The distinguishing point here is the locus of the authorship of the law. So when we say authorship, refers to any type of expression independently conceived by its creator. In any scenario where a person complies with the law, we ask where the author is, whether it is external or internal. If the author of the law is external, the will is subjected to an external authority, thus heteronomous will. When we say heteronomous, subject to external controls and impositions. And if the author was the will itself, imposing the law unto itself, then it described the will as autonomous. So when we say autonomous naman, this is a person or entity that is self-controlling and not governed by outside forces. Fourth slide. So we have example here, the 25-year-old versions of Ryan and Liza who brush their teeth before going to bed without any prompting from their parents. Their adoption of the childhood law about toothbrushing makes the locus of the authorship internal. Thus, they are autonomous. Now, may I call on the next reporter, Mr. Marlo Sonner.
Kant claims that there is a difference between rational will and animal impulse. The choice that can be determined by pure reason is called free choice. So Kant's views about the difference of rational will and animal impulse is that Kant sees humans and animals to be definitively, neatly distinct, meaning that the central distinction would be humans are rational and possessed of reason, while animals are irrational or they devoid of reason. Next, human choice in contrast is a choice that may be affected but not determined by impulses. In short, it implies that we are indeed basically animals, but we cannot reduce to mere animality. Next, there is a difference between what determines a choice or decision, whether it is caused by sensible impulse or by pure reason. On one hand, sensible impulses are usually bodily and emotional. So, choice is our power. Parang lahat we have the right to choose whatever we want. While decision is an extensive form and kailangan nyo munang mag-undergo ng systematic process para makakuha ng firm conclusion kasi hindi tayo makakapag-decide agad without any consideration. Next, bodily instincts and desires such as the urge to eat, drink, sleep, or have a sexual intercourse comprise the set of human compulsion for survival and the propagation of the species. Emotions and sentiments also make up what Kant considers sensible impulses. Next, there is immediacy to sensible impulses. There is hardly anything that comes between the stimulus and the reaction. Kant calls this set of action that are caused by sensible impulse, animal choice, or arbitrium brutum. So sabi nga natin kanina, there's a difference between animals and humans in terms of will. So meaning there's also immediacy or involved na siya to sensible impulse. Next, there is choice or action that is determined by pure reason. Kant calls this kind of action free choice. So dito na pumapasok yung power or right natin to have this kind of choice without any judgment or consideration anchored kasi it's a free choice and it argues to human freedom. Next, Rationality was described as the mental capacity to construct ideas and thoughts that are beyond one's immediate surroundings. This mental capacity is what makes the intervention possible between stimulus and reaction.
Next is, what is universalizability? Universalizability, it is a form of moral test that a particular moral judgment always have or carry universal judgment that invites us to imagine a world in which any proposed action is also adopted by everyone else. It is a test that will enhance or helps us to determine how we can judge or give a moral judgment to a particular person. So, it has a method or a specific procedure that demonstrates a person's autonomy or will where knowing the two distinguishing distinctions of moral theories, namely substantive and formal moral theories. First is a substantive moral theory, promulgates the specification that comprises the theory. It identifies the particular duties in a straightforward manner that the adherents of the theory must follow. The Judeo-Christian tradition's Ten Commandments are a clear example of a substantive moral theory. The specific laws are mostly expressed in the form of a simple moral command like honor your father and mother, and you shall not kill, and so on. The next one is a formal moral theory. This theory does not supply the rules or commands straightway. It does not tell you what you may or may not do. A formal moral theory, on the other hand, provides us with the form or framework of the moral theory. To provide the form of a moral theory is to provide a procedure and criteria for determining the rules and moral commands on one's own. This is a procedure that we must follow, but it does not provide us with the rules. We must learn them on our own. The best example of this is a cookbook. We're given instructions on how to cook certain dishes, but not the actual food itself, which would be substantive. When following a recipe for sinigang, for example, we may alter the ingredients and order of steps slightly. However, whether or not you wish to do is entirely up to you, but it is up to you if you want to keep the sinigang and not turn it into another type of viand like pochero. To be more specific, a formal moral theory will not provide us with a set of rules or commands. Instead, it will instruct us on how to create a list of duties or moral commands.
After knowing about the universalizability, let's talk about the imperatives that Kant had imposed. First is the hypothetical imperatives. These are the principles that we should follow only if we have certain desires. He pointed out, most of the time, whether or not we ought to do something isn't really a moral choice. Instead, it's just a contingent on our desires. Basically, hypothetical imperatives, nakadepende sa'yo yung action based from the outcome that you want to achieve. Like, if your desire is to get money, then you ought to get a job. If your desire is get an A in class, then you ought to study. So if you don't want money, you can always choose not to work. And if you don't care about getting a good grade, studying becomes totally optional. Nasa atin po ang pasya kung ano ang gusto nating gawin. But Kant viewed morality not in terms of hypothetical imperatives, but through what he called categorical imperatives. These are commands you must follow regardless of your desires. Categorical imperatives are our moral obligations, and Kant believed that they're derived from pure reason. He said that it didn't matter whether you want to be moral or not, the moral law is binding on all of us. And he said you don't need religion to determine what that law is, because what's right or wrong is totally knowledgeable but just by using your intellect. So ano nga ba ang formulations na pinopose ni Kant under categorical imperative? There are 4 but we will only tackle about the universalizability. Act only according to that maxim which you can at the same time will it should become a universal law without contradiction. So a maxim is just a rule or principle on action, and a universal law is something that must always be done in similar situations. So before I act, I would ask myself, what's the maxim of my action? In other words, ano ang pangkalahatang tuntunin na nasa likod ng partikular na pagkilos na aking isinaalang-alang? So, for example, white lie, yung paggamit ng white lie. Your maxim could be lie to a friend in order for her or him to not hurt. So, it may work in your favor. Hindi naman masama ang paggamit ng white lie. Pero, this is not the case when we apply universalizability. Kasi if everyone lied to everyone else when there is bad news or something negative to say, it is not hard to imagine that people would just stop trusting each other. We have to ask ourselves, paano if ginawa yun ng pangkalahatan? Kunyari, yung pagpatay, murder cannot be universalized. If everybody murdered people who they did not like, then there would be no people left. Or if lying cannot be universalized, if everyone lied, then nobody would believe what anybody says, and lying would be pointless. On a smaller scale, universalizability is intended to be used as a tool to help you make informed moral decisions, not a literal future predictor. It helps you find the nuance in moral ethics and is something you can actually use in real life.
Let's move on to the summary. In conclusion, what can deontology contribute to our lives, specifically to our moral reflection? The answer lies in one concept: enlightenment morality. This kind of morality is opposed to paternalism, which evokes the metaphor of father. So, alam naman natin na malaki ang ginagampanan ng isang ama sa kanyang pamilya. Bilang haligi ng isang tahanan, inaasahan na itataguyod niya ang sariling pamilya nang walang inaasahang may iba pang magtataguyod. He also has benevolent authority in his home. He enforces order in the home and creates rule and dinidisiplina ang mga anak upang maituwid sa kanilang pagkakamali. In this metaphor, the father has the power to make decisions for and enforce obedience on the children, as long as the children are dependent and may not know yet what is best for them. Thus, the father make decisions on behalf of and in the interest of the children. So, dito pumapasok ang duty. It is his duty to raise and nurture them for their own good. The children are expected to comply and obey because they are still unfit to make good decisions on their own. Children, when left on their own, would likely follow base impulses because they lack the necessary experience and rational will to survive and flourish in this world. But what happens when children grow and become mature adults? When they move on to develop their minds and live their own lives? Certainly, paternalism has to give way to a more mature, rational will when the children are no longer children. When they mature and can begin to navigate the complex world, so as they get older, they learn new things, explore the world around them, and develop their own unique personalities. This is therefore the place of deontology in the spirit of enlightenment morality. Deontology is based on the light of one's own reason when maturity and rational capacity take hold of a person's decision-making. Reason is depicted as having its own light in contrast to our long experience of paternalism in human history, in which we find dictatorship and authority figure that claim to be benevolent, but have proven to be oppressive and exploitative of those who do not have political power. With deontology, particularly the method of universalizability, we can validate and adapt those rules and laws that are right and reject those that are irrational, thus impermissible because they are self-contradictory. This is then practical value of deontology in our moral reflections. We are encouraged to have courage to think on our own, to use our rational will against external authorities as well as internal based impulses that tend to undermine our autonomy and self-determination. And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you and God bless us all.